There I stood in my own doorway, watching my daughter-in-law Jessica raise a champagne glass in my backyard while wearing my grandmother's diamond earrings. The music thundered through the walls as she shouted to her friends, "She's finally gone, we're free!" My son Brad lounged beside her, his knuckles still bruised from where he'd struck me hours earlier. The cold November air bit through my coat as I watched them celebrate my departure from the house I'd lived in for 37 years. Jessica had already started rearranging my furniture, and someone was carrying out boxes of my belongings to the trash. But they had no idea what I'd discovered while I was gone. 3 months earlier, my life seemed blessed despite the grief that still visited me unexpectedly. Frank had been gone for 2 years now, taken by a heart attack that arrived without warning on a Tuesday morning while he was reading the newspaper at our kitchen table. The house in suburban Denver felt enormous without him, every creak and settling sound a reminder of how quiet my world had become. When Brad called that autumn day voice thick with what sounded like genuine distress, asking if he and Jessica could move in temporarily, my heart leaped with relief. "Mom, I hate to ask, but we're really struggling," he'd said, and I could hear Jessica crying softly in the background. "I lost my construction job 6 months ago, and Jessica's hours at the boutique got cut. We're behind on rent, and honestly, we don't know what else to do." The word family has always been sacred to me, carved into my bones by a mother who taught me that blood meant everything. When your child needs help, you don't hesitate. You open your door, your heart, your wallet if necessary. Frank had left us comfortable with his pension and Social Security, plus the house was paid off completely. The mortgage had been satisfied 5 years before his death, making our 4-bedroom colonial on Maple Street worth approximately $400,000 according to the property assessments I'd received. "Of course you can stay here," I told Brad without a moment's hesitation. "This is your home too. Stay as long as you need." That first week felt like Christmas morning. Jessica hugged me tight when they arrived, thanking me repeatedly while Brad carried their belongings into his old bedroom. The house suddenly felt alive again with conversation, laughter, and the simple comfort of not eating dinner alone. I prepared elaborate meals, rediscovering my joy in cooking for others. Jessica praised my pot roast and asked for my recipe for apple pie. Brad fixed the loose banister I'd been meaning to address for months. I began covering all the household expenses without question. The utility bills, groceries, property taxes, even Jessica's credit card payments when she mentioned struggling with debt from before Brad lost his job. Money meant nothing compared to having my family close. When Jessica admired a handbag at the mall during one of our shopping trips, I bought it for her immediately. When Brad mentioned needing new work boots for job interviews, I handed him my credit card without hesitation. Looking back now, the red flags appeared almost immediately, but love makes us blind to inconvenient truths. Jessica would answer phone calls in hushed tones, hanging up quickly when I entered the room. Brad's job search seemed surprisingly unfocused for someone supposedly desperate for work. He'd leave in the morning claiming to have interviews, then return smelling like beer and offering vague explanations about meeting potential employers at sports bars. Jessica began making small changes to my home, always with a smile and an explanation designed to sound helpful. "Myrtle, this old furniture arrangement blocks the natural light," she'd say, while moving my favorite reading chair away from the window where Frank and I used to sit together each evening. "Let me help you create better flow through these rooms." My photo albums disappeared from the living room coffee table. When I asked about them, Jessica claimed she'd moved them somewhere safe while cleaning. My collection of ceramic angels accumulated over decades gradually vanished from the mantelpiece. Jessica explained she was protecting them from accidentally getting knocked over. Frank's reading glasses, which I'd kept on his side table as a small comfort, vanished completely. Jessica suggested I was ready to let go of the past and move forward. The whispered conversations increased. Late at night, I'd hear their voices through the thin walls, urgent and secretive. If I approached, they'd switch to discussing harmless topics like television shows or grocery shopping. When I mentioned feeling excluded, Jessica would laugh and say they were just discussing personal matters or Brad's job prospects. My neighbor Margaret, a sharp-eyed woman in her 70s who'd lived next door for 20 years, began making pointed comments during our fence line conversations. "Your daughter-in-law certainly seems comfortable making changes," she'd say, watching Jessica direct a furniture delivery truck. "And Brad's home quite a bit for someone actively job hunting." Dr. Helen Sanders, my family physician and friend for 2 decades, expressed concern during my routine checkup. "You look tired, Myrtle. Are you sleeping well? You seem more stressed than usual." When I explained about my house guests, she frowned thoughtfully. "Remember that even family can create stress. Don't sacrifice your own well-being trying to help others." Pastor William at the Methodist Church, where I volunteered every Tuesday, noticed changes too. "You missed the last 3 volunteer sessions," he mentioned after service one Sunday. "That's not like you at all." I explained that Jessica had scheduled appointments and errands during those times, thinking I'd want company for everything. Pastor William's expression suggested he found this unusual. The financial demands escalated subtly. Jessica would mention expensive organic groceries being necessary for her health condition, which she described vaguely as digestive sensitivity requiring special foods. Brad claimed he needed money for gas and networking lunches with potential employers. When their old car broke down, I found myself co-signing for a loan on a newer vehicle, reasoning that Brad needed reliable transportation for job hunting. 3 months into their stay, the atmosphere in my home had shifted completely, though I couldn't pinpoint exactly when or how. I was doing all the cooking, cleaning, and yard work, while they attended various appointments, meetings, and social obligations. My routine had been completely reorganized around their schedules and preferences. Even my grocery shopping required Jessica's approval since she'd developed strong opinions about brands and meal planning. One Tuesday evening, while preparing dinner in the kitchen I'd cooked in for decades, I overheard Jessica on her cell phone in the living room. Her voice carried clearly through the open doorway as she spoke in tones I'd never heard her use before. "Don't worry, she'll be gone soon. The old bat won't know what hit her." My hands stilled on the carrots I'd been chopping. The old bat. The casual cruelty in those words made my stomach clench. I moved closer to the doorway, straining to hear more, but Jessica had lowered her voice. When I finally worked up the courage to confront her, she was ending the call with casual pleasantries. "Jessica, who were you talking about just now?" Her smile was radiant and innocent. "Oh, just someone from work. We have this impossible customer who complains about everything. She makes all our lives miserable, but rumor has it she's moving to another city soon." Jessica's laugh sounded genuine. "Sorry if I sounded harsh. Sometimes you just need to vent about difficult people you know." The explanation felt reasonable, even sympathetic. Everyone deals with challenging coworkers or customers. I returned to preparing dinner, pushing down the uncomfortable feeling that had lodged itself in my chest. But late that night, lying alone in the bed I'd shared with Frank, I couldn't shake the memory of those words or the tone in which they'd been delivered. "The old bat won't know what hit her." Something cold settled in my stomach as I realized Jessica had been facing away from me, looking directly at the family photos on our mantelpiece when she'd spoken those words. The changes began so subtly that I questioned my own perception. Small items would disappear from their usual places, then reappear days later somewhere completely illogical. My reading glasses vanished from my bedside table, only to turn up in the refrigerator behind a carton of milk. When I mentioned this strangeness to Jessica, she looked genuinely concerned. "Oh, Myrtle, that sounds frightening. Are you feeling all right? Maybe you should mention this to Dr. Sanders at your next appointment." My prescription bottles, carefully organized in the bathroom medicine cabinet for years, began appearing in random locations. Blood pressure medication turned up in the kitchen spice rack. Sleep aids materialized in my jewelry box. Each time I discovered these displaced items, Jessica expressed growing worry about my mental state. "Mom, I found your heart medication in the laundry room yesterday," Brad would say with furrowed brows. "That's really dangerous. What if you'd forgotten to take your doses?" Car keys became a constant source of frustration. I'd place them on the hall table as I had for decades, only to find them missing when I needed to leave for church or appointments. They'd appear later in peculiar places, the bathroom drawer inside a cookbook buried in the couch cushions. These mysterious relocations cost me several missed appointments when I couldn't find them in time. The memory lapses Jessica began describing to others worried me deeply, mainly because I had no recollection of the incidents she detailed. She'd tell Margaret across the fence, "Poor Myrtle got confused yesterday and couldn't remember making lunch. She insisted she hadn't eaten even though I'd watched her finish a full sandwich an hour earlier." To Dr. Sanders during a routine visit, Jessica confided, "I'm concerned about her nighttime wandering. Brad and I hear her moving around the house at all hours. When we check on her, she seems disoriented and doesn't remember getting up." These reports terrified me because I felt completely alert and aware during my daily activities. My memory seemed sharp, my thinking clear, yet trusted people were documenting behaviors I couldn't recall. The contradiction created a constant undercurrent of anxiety that made me doubt my own perceptions. Brad's agreement with Jessica's observations added credibility to concerns about my mental decline. "I hate to say it, but Mom definitely seems more forgetful lately. She asked me the same question 3 times yesterday about when I'd be home for dinner." The doctor Jessica recommended, Dr. Patricia Novak, specialized in geriatric neurology and had impressive credentials displayed prominently in her office. During our first consultation, Jessica accompanied me and provided detailed accounts of symptoms I supposedly exhibited but couldn't remember experiencing. "She frequently loses track of time," Jessica explained while I sat silently trying to reconcile her descriptions with my own experience. "Last week, she forgot she'd already watered the garden and soaked the same flower bed 3 times. The plants are actually suffering from overwatering now." Dr. Novak conducted standard cognitive assessments, asking me to remember word lists, solve simple math problems, and identify common objects. I performed well on these tests, which seemed to surprise Jessica. However, Dr. Novak explained that early cognitive decline could be subtle and might not immediately affect test performance. "We'll want to monitor the situation closely," Dr. Novak advised. "Family observations are often more revealing than clinical testing in early stages." Financial irregularities began appearing that genuinely confused me. Bank statements showed checks I didn't remember writing, including a substantial payment to something called Senior Care Solutions and another to Estate Planning Associates. When I questioned these transactions at the bank, the teller showed me signature cards that matched my handwriting perfectly. My debit card was declined at the grocery store one afternoon, creating an embarrassing scene at the checkout counter. The bank later explained that unusual spending patterns had triggered fraud protection, but they couldn't specify what purchases had raised concerns. Jessica suggested that my confusion might be leading to impulsive shopping I didn't remember. "Maybe I should help manage your finances for a while," she offered kindly. "Just until we figure out what's causing these memory issues. I don't want you to worry about complicated money matters when you're dealing with health concerns." This suggestion felt both reasonable and terrifying. The idea of losing control over my finances represented a fundamental loss of independence, yet the mounting evidence of my supposed cognitive decline made Jessica's offer seem practical and caring. Pastor William mentioned that I'd seemed distant during recent church services. You used to be so engaged during sermons, but lately you appear to drift off. Are you feeling well? Margaret expressed similar observations. You seem different lately, Myrtle. More withdrawn. Yesterday you walked right past me in your garden without responding when I said hello. These reports from people I trusted completely undermined my confidence in my own mental state. If multiple reliable sources were documenting concerning behaviors, perhaps I really was experiencing cognitive decline. The possibility filled me with dread and made me increasingly dependent on Jessica's support and guidance. My secret notebook hidden in my sewing box began documenting inconsistencies I noticed despite my supposed memory problems. I recorded the exact locations where I'd placed items that later disappeared the times I'd supposedly exhibited confused behavior, according to Jessica, and discrepancies between my recollections and her reports. One entry read, "Jessica says I forgot our lunch plans and wandered around the kitchen confused for 20 minutes. But I remember clearly I was reorganizing spice jars because several were in wrong places again. When she found me, I was putting oregano back where it belonged." Another note detailed, "Brad claims I asked him 5 times about dinner plans. I only asked once after he gave me 3 different answers about whether he'd be eating at home." These private observations suggested a pattern, but I dismissed them as desperate attempts to deny my deteriorating condition. Who could I trust more, my own potentially failing mind, or the careful observations of family members who loved me? The breakthrough moment arrived during a routine evening when Jessica prepared my usual chamomile tea. As she handed me the warm mug, I noticed fine white residue floating on the surface. When I mentioned this, Jessica appeared genuinely concerned and took the mug back to the kitchen. "Oh my goodness, I must not have rinsed it properly after washing," she said, returning with a fresh cup that looked identical to the first. But curiosity and growing suspicion drove me to examine the first mug which she'd left on the counter. Using a magnifying glass Frank had used for reading small print, I discovered tiny white particles clinging to the bottom. These particles looked distinctly pharmaceutical, not like soap residue or ordinary debris. Late that night, while Jessica and Brad slept, I searched Jessica's belongings with the methodical care Frank had taught me during his years as an insurance investigator. In her jewelry box beneath layers of costume earrings, I found exactly what my growing paranoia had suggested: a mortar and pestle with white powder residue, 3 of my missing sleep medication pills, and a computer printout about early onset dementia symptoms. Most damning of all was a business card for Sunset Manor Assisted Living Facility with handwritten notes on the back: monthly rate $4, $200. Accepts Medicaid after private funds exhausted. Memory care wing available. Jessica had been drugging my evening tea with my own sleeping pills, creating the disorientation and memory gaps she then reported to medical professionals. The careful documentation of my supposed decline served a purpose I was only beginning to understand, but the evidence in my hands painted a picture of deliberate deception designed to convince everyone, including myself, that I was losing my mind. The realization struck me like a physical blow. My own family was systematically destroying my reputation, my independence, and my sanity for reasons I could only guess at. But now I knew the truth, and everything was about to change. Armed with the terrible knowledge of what Jessica and Brad were doing to my mind, I began investigating my finances with the attention to detail Frank had always demonstrated in his insurance work. What I discovered made the drugging seem like merely the opening act in a much larger performance. My banking statements, which I'd always reviewed carefully, revealed patterns I'd somehow missed or forgotten due to the sleeping pills clouding my judgment. Over the past 6 weeks, 17 checks had been written from my account that I had no memory of authorizing. These weren't small amounts: $800 to home renovation specialists, $1,200 to senior legal services, and $1,500 to something called medical assessment associates. The signatures on these checks looked remarkably similar to my handwriting, but subtle differences became apparent under careful examination. The M in Myrtle slanted differently than my natural writing style. The loop in my E was smaller than usual. Someone with access to multiple samples of my signature had practiced duplicating it with considerable skill. Bank records revealed that Jessica had somehow gained access to my online banking information. Login records showed account access at times when I'd been sleeping or away from the house. Transfers had been made between my savings and checking accounts, moving money in ways that disguised the steady drain of funds from my accounts. More disturbing were credit cards I'd never applied for, all showing my personal information and bearing my signature. Capital One. Discover and Chase had each approved cards with credit limits totaling over $30,000. These accounts showed consistent usage at high-end stores, restaurants, and online retailers. The spending patterns clearly indicated someone with expensive tastes and no concern for eventual payment. Jessica's part-time boutique job, which supposedly provided our family's only income, seemed remarkably well-funded for someone facing financial hardship. Her closet contained designer clothes I'd assumed were gifts from generous relatives or consignment store finds. Her jewelry collection included pieces I recognized as genuine gold and diamonds, far beyond what her modest salary could support. Brad's supposed job search looked increasingly fictional under scrutiny. The unemployment benefits he claimed to receive weren't reflected in any deposits to his personal accounts. Yet he had money for daily lunches, out premium gasoline for the car I'd co-signed for, and regular purchases of craft beer that cost more per six-pack than I spent on groceries for an entire day. My investigation revealed they'd been meeting regularly with attorney Ronald Hayes, whose office specialized in elder law and estate planning. Phone records from my landline showed multiple calls to his office, though I'd never contacted any lawyers since Frank's death. When I called pretending to confirm an appointment, the receptionist mentioned that Mr. and Mrs. Patterson are scheduled to discuss the conservatorship paperwork next Tuesday. Patterson was Brad's last name. The conservatorship paperwork could only refer to legal proceedings to declare me incompetent and transfer control of my affairs to them. Further digging revealed they'd already received pre-approval for a mortgage on a luxury townhouse across town. The application, which I found copies of hidden in Brad's closet, listed my current home as collateral and included forged documents showing my consent for this arrangement. They'd somehow obtained a property appraisal of my house and calculated exactly how much equity they could extract. The scope of their planning became clear through documents carelessly left in Jessica's car, which I searched while they attended one of their mysterious appointments. Real estate listings for expensive homes, furniture catalogs with items circled, and vacation brochures suggested they were spending imaginary money with confidence that it would soon become real. Most chilling was a folder labeled Medical Documentation, containing correspondence between Jessica and Dr. Novak. The letters discussed my supposed cognitive decline in clinical terms, referencing behaviors and incidents I now realized had been fabricated or induced through drugging. Dr. Novak's responses suggested she was providing exactly the medical opinions Jessica needed to support a competency hearing. Jessica had researched legal ways to have elderly relatives declared incompetent extensively based on browser history I found when using Brad's laptop to check my email one afternoon. The search terms were specific and troubling: elder abuse laws, Colorado, how to contest competency evaluations, and minimum assets required for conservatorship proceedings. I began documenting everything with the methodical approach Frank had taught me for insurance investigations. Photos of forged checks, copies of unauthorized credit applications, recordings of their phone conversations captured by a small device I purchased with cash during a grocery shopping trip to Radio Shack. The recording device, no larger than a matchbox, captured conversations they believed were private. Hidden in the kitchen light fixture, it documented planning sessions that revealed the full scope of their intentions. "The competency hearing is scheduled for 3 weeks from now," I heard Jessica tell Brad during one recorded conversation. "Dr. Novak will testify about her declining mental state, and Hayes says the financial mismanagement evidence is overwhelming." Brad's response chilled me to my bones. "What about after we get conservatorship? How long before we can access the house equity?" "Hayes says within 30 days of the court order, we can refinance and extract up to 80% of the home's value. That's about $320,000 minus his fees and the nursing home deposit. Sunset Manor requires how much upfront? $12,000 for the first year, then they bill Medicaid once her savings are gone. Hayes estimates we'll have clear access to over $300,000 after all expenses." My neighbor Margaret had been more observant than I'd realized. When I discreetly mentioned my concerns about Jessica and Brad's behavior, she revealed she'd been keeping detailed notes about suspicious activities she'd witnessed. "I've seen them going through your mail," she confided during a fence line conversation while Jessica shopped. "And last week, a man in a suit came to your house while you were at church. He spent an hour taking photos of every room." Dr. Sanders became an unexpected ally when Jessica attempted to gain unauthorized access to my medical records. The office called to verify my consent for releasing information to family members assisting with your care, which immediately raised red flags since I'd given no such permission. "Myrtle, someone claiming to be your daughter-in-law, called requesting your complete medical file," Dr. Sanders told me during a private phone call. "I thought you should know before we release anything." Bank teller Sharon Davis had noticed irregularities in my account activity and quietly documented them according to fraud prevention protocols. When I finally spoke with her directly, she revealed that someone had been making inquiries about my accounts and attempting to gain access to information about my financial situation. "We've had multiple calls asking about your account balances and questioning whether you were mentally competent to manage your own affairs," Sharon explained quietly. "Our policy is to flag such inquiries as potential elder abuse indicators." The final piece of evidence came from private investigator David Torres, whom I contacted using money from a small emergency fund Frank had hidden in our bedroom. David's surveillance revealed that Brad had never lost his construction job at all. He was actually still employed, but had been using sick leave and vacation time to focus on what David's report termed systematic financial fraud targeting elderly family member. "Your son has been seen at his workplace multiple times per week," David's written report stated. "Employment verification confirms he remains on active payroll with full benefits. The unemployment claims appear to be fraudulent." Jessica's boutique job was also more lucrative than she'd claimed. David discovered she was actually the assistant manager with access to store credit accounts, which explained her expensive wardrobe and jewelry. Her supposed financial desperation was entirely fictional. The timeline they'd established was aggressive and nearly complete. I had less than 72 hours before the competency hearing that would strip away my independence and transfer control of my life savings to the people who'd been systematically destroying my health and sanity. But now I understood the enemy I was fighting and I had evidence that could destroy their carefully constructed lies. Frank had always told me that the best defense against fraud was preparation, documentation, and timing. They thought they were stealing from a confused, medicated elderly woman who would never figure out their scheme. Instead, they'd targeted someone who'd learned investigation techniques from a skilled professional and retained every bit of my intelligence despite their attempts to cloud my thinking. The game was about to change completely, and they had no idea what was coming. The morning after discovering the full extent of their betrayal, I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror and made a choice that would determine the rest of my life. I could confront them directly and watch them scramble to cover their tracks, or I could become the actress they believed I was too simple to be. Frank always said that the most dangerous opponent is the one who lets you think you're winning right up until the moment you lose everything. I decided to give them exactly what they expected: a confused, declining elderly woman who was grateful for their help and completely unaware of their true intentions. "Jessica, honey, could you help me understand these bank statements?" I asked that afternoon, holding papers with a bewildered expression I practiced in the mirror. "There are so many numbers, and I can't seem to make sense of them anymore." Her face lit up with what looked like genuine pleasure. "Of course, Myrtle. I know financial things can be overwhelming. Why don't you let me handle all this paperwork for you? It's really too much for someone dealing with memory issues." I allowed her to take control of my mail, my banking statements, and my financial correspondence with expressions of relief and gratitude. Meanwhile, I was secretly meeting with attorney Sarah Mitchell, whom I'd contacted using a phone number Dr. Sanders provided. Sarah specialized in elder abuse cases and had seen exactly this kind of systematic fraud many times before. "The key is letting them continue their plan while we build an airtight case," Sarah explained during our clandestine meeting at a coffee shop across town. "If we move too early, they'll claim everything was a misunderstanding. We need them to commit fully to their scheme." Sarah connected me with Detective Carlos Hernandez from the Denver Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit. Carlos had investigated dozens of elder abuse cases and immediately recognized the sophisticated nature of what Brad and Jessica were attempting. "This isn't opportunistic theft," Carlos explained. "This is organized long-term fraud with multiple participants. The medical manipulation component makes it particularly serious under Colorado law." Private investigator David Torres continued his surveillance, while I maintained my performance as the confused victim. His reports detailed their meetings with various accomplices, their spending of money stolen from my accounts, and their increasing confidence that their plan was succeeding perfectly. The most difficult part was pretending the sleeping pills were still affecting me when I'd stopped drinking Jessica's drugged tea entirely. I had to simulate the grogginess and confusion they expected, while remaining alert enough to continue gathering evidence. I perfected a slightly vacant stare, practiced asking the same questions repeatedly, and developed a convincing portrayal of someone losing their grip on reality. "Mom, you asked me that same thing 10 minutes ago," Brad would say with exaggerated patience when I repeated questions about dinner plans or household schedules. "Did I? Oh dear, I'm sorry. Sometimes I feel so scattered lately." I'd touch my forehead with a worried expression that masked my satisfaction at their obvious relief that the drugging was working. Jessica became increasingly bold in her manipulation as she believed my mental state was deteriorating further. She began making decisions about my medical care, my social activities, and my daily routine with the authority of someone who expected to have legal control very soon. "I've scheduled you for some additional tests with Dr. Novak," she announced one morning. "We want to make sure we understand exactly what's happening with your memory problems." I agreed enthusiastically, knowing that these appointments were building the medical case they'd need for the competency hearing. Meanwhile, I was secretly meeting with Dr. Sanders for legitimate medical evaluations that would prove my complete mental competence. The financial evidence continued mounting as they grew careless about hiding their activities. Jessica used my credit cards openly, assuming I wouldn't notice or remember the charges. Brad made expensive purchases with forged checks, confident that my supposed confusion would prevent me from tracking the missing money. I began opening separate bank accounts at institutions they didn't know about, slowly transferring funds to protect them from additional theft. This required careful timing and planning to avoid triggering their suspicion, but I managed to secure most of my liquid assets before they could steal everything. My performance convinced everyone except the people I'd secretly recruited to help me. Margaret continued documenting suspicious activities from her strategic position next door. Dr. Sanders provided medical evidence of my competence while maintaining the appearance of routine health care. Attorney Sarah Mitchell prepared legal documents while staying completely hidden from Brad and Jessica's awareness. Pastor William became an unexpected ally when I confided in him about needing spiritual guidance during a difficult time with my memory. He immediately understood the real situation and began providing cover for my clandestine meetings by scheduling counseling sessions that were actually strategy sessions with my legal team. Your son and daughter-in-law approached me about resources for families dealing with dementia, Pastor William told me during one of these meetings. They seemed very concerned about your welfare and asked about church programs for caregivers. This information revealed they were systematically building a public narrative of concern and responsibility that would support their legal case. Everyone in our community was being carefully prepared to testify about my declining mental state and their devoted care for me. The recordings I'd captured revealed they'd scheduled the competency hearing for the following week and had already made arrangements for my immediate placement at Sunset Manor once the court granted them conservatorship. They'd paid the nursing home deposit with money stolen from my accounts and selected a room in the memory care unit. Hayes says the judge will definitely approve the emergency conservatorship based on the medical evidence and financial mismanagement documentation. I heard Jessica tell someone during a phone conversation I recorded. By next Friday, she'll be in the nursing home and will have full control of the estate. Brad's response during that same conversation revealed the depth of their planning. I've already given notice at work and told them I'm becoming a full-time caregiver for my mother. The sympathy factor should help if anyone asks questions later. So he'd been employed the entire time, just as David Torres had discovered. The unemployment story was completely fabricated to justify their presence in my home and their access to my finances. Their timeline was aggressive but achievable if I remained the confused, grateful victim they believed me to be. By the end of the following week, I would be locked in a nursing home with no access to my money, my home, or my independence. They would control an estate worth nearly $500,000 and have legal authority to make every decision about my life. But their timeline depended on factors they couldn't control anymore. Unknown to them, Detective Hernandez was preparing arrest warrants based on evidence I'd provided. Attorney Sarah Mitchell had documentation ready to prove fraud and elder abuse that would invalidate their conservatorship petition. Dr. Sanders had medical evaluations proving my complete competence despite their claims about my mental decline. Most importantly, Adult Protective Services investigator Janet Morrison had been building a case file that would result in immediate intervention once I gave the signal to proceed. The trap was set perfectly. They believed they were days away from complete victory, while I was actually preparing to destroy their lives as thoroughly as they'd tried to destroy mine. Frank would have been proud of the investigation I'd conducted and the evidence I'd gathered. More than that, he would have approved of the justice I was about to deliver. All I had to do was maintain my performance for 3 more days, then watch their world collapse around them with the same systematic precision they'd used to plan my destruction. Tuesday morning arrived gray and cold, with November wind rattling the windows and dead leaves skittering across the yard like nervous insects. I sat at my kitchen table, pretending to struggle with the nursing home brochures Jessica had left conspicuously placed beside my coffee cup. The Sunset Manor materials looked cheerful and welcoming in their glossy presentation, but I knew they represented the final stage of my family's plan to erase me from my own life. "Myrtle, we need to discuss some important decisions," Jessica announced, settling into the chair across from me with her laptop and a stack of official-looking documents. Brad joined us, his expression serious, and his breath already carrying the sharp scent of morning beer. I maintained my confused, grateful demeanor while internally preparing for what I suspected would be our final confrontation as a family. "Of course, dear. You both have been so helpful with everything. I know I've been more scattered lately." Jessica's smile carried the warmth of a predator approaching wounded prey. "We've been talking to some professionals about your condition, and everyone agrees you need more specialized care than we can provide at home." She opened the laptop and turned it toward me, displaying the Sunset Manor website with its photographs of smiling elderly residents engaged in crafts and gentle exercise. "This facility has an excellent memory care program specifically designed for people experiencing cognitive decline." I picked up my reading glasses and peered at the screen with exaggerated difficulty, squinting as though the simple words were becoming challenging to decipher. "It looks very nice. Are we just gathering information, or—" "Actually, we've already completed the preliminary paperwork," Brad interrupted with barely concealed impatience. "Dr. Novak has provided the medical documentation they require, and we've arranged financing for the monthly fees." The word financing made my stomach clench because I understood exactly what it meant. They were planning to pay for my imprisonment with money stolen from my own accounts, using forged authorizations I'd supposedly provided due to my declining mental capacity. "But I feel fine living here with you both," I protested gently, allowing a note of confusion and hurt to enter my voice. "Have I been that much trouble I try not to be a burden?" Jessica reached across the table and patted my hand with practiced sympathy. "You're not a burden at all. We love you dearly, but your needs are becoming more complex than we can handle. Last week alone, you forgot to turn off the stove twice, couldn't remember taking your medications, and got lost coming back from the grocery store." None of these incidents had actually occurred, but I nodded with the worried acceptance they expected. "I suppose I have been more forgetful. Maybe professional care would be better." Brad's relief was visible as he pulled out a thick folder of documents requiring my signature. "These forms will authorize the placement and allow us to manage your financial affairs during the transition. It's really just a formality, but the lawyers insist on proper documentation." I examined the papers with growing alarm that I carefully disguised as confusion. Power of attorney documents, property transfer authorizations, and medical decision-making forms that would strip away every vestige of my independence. The nursing home admission papers showed a monthly fee of $4,200, exactly matching the information I'd found in Jessica's research materials. "There are so many pages," I murmured, turning through the documents slowly. "And all these legal terms are difficult to understand. Why do you need access to my banking information for the nursing home application?" Brad's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. We'd been through this conversation before during my performance as a declining elderly woman, and his patience with repeated questions was wearing thin. "Mom, I explained this yesterday. The facility requires complete financial disclosure to determine payment methods and eligibility for assistance programs. It's standard procedure for all admissions." I set the papers down and folded my hands in my lap, allowing genuine emotion to enter my voice for the first time in weeks. I'm frightened. This feels very sudden. Could we perhaps wait a few more weeks? Maybe get another medical opinion? The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Jessica's sympathetic expression hardened into something much more calculating, while Brad's face flushed with anger he'd been suppressing throughout this entire charade. "There's no time for delays," Jessica said sharply. "Your condition is deteriorating rapidly. Dr. Novak believes immediate placement is necessary for your safety and well-being." "But I don't feel like I'm deteriorating." I began, then stopped as Brad stood abruptly from his chair, looming over me with clenched fists. "Enough!" His voice cracked like a whip through the kitchen. "You're going to sign these papers right now, or we're going to have problems." The mask had finally slipped completely away. This was no longer concerned family discussing care options for a beloved relative. This was what it had always been: thieves demanding access to their victims' assets with threats and intimidation. I stood slowly, my hands trembling, not with fear, but with rage I'd been suppressing for months. "I think I need some time to consider all this. Perhaps I should consult with my own attorney before signing anything so important." Brad grabbed my wrist with sufficient force to leave bruises, his fingers digging into my skin as he jerked me back toward the table. "You don't need your own attorney. We've already paid lawyers to handle everything. You're going to sign these papers because that's what's best for everyone." "You're hurting me," I said quietly, looking down at his hand wrapped around my wrist like a shackle. Jessica leaned forward, her voice carrying a vicious edge I'd never heard before. "She's not going to remember this conversation anyway, Brad. Her memory problems are getting worse every day." I tried to pull away from Brad's grip, and he responded by shoving me hard against the kitchen counter. The edge caught me across my ribs, driving the breath from my lungs and sending sharp pain through my torso. I stumbled, catching myself against the counter while bright spots danced across my vision. "Stop this right now!" I gasped, but Brad was beyond hearing reason. "You're going to cooperate whether you like it or not," he snarled, raising his hand. "I'm tired of pretending you have any choice in this matter." His palm connected with my cheek in a sharp crack that snapped my head to the side and brought tears to my eyes. The force of the blow sent me staggering, and I had to grip the counter edge to keep from falling. My face burned with pain, and the metallic taste of blood filled my mouth. Jessica watched with satisfaction rather than horror. "Maybe now she'll understand that we're serious about this." Brad grabbed my arms with both hands, his fingers digging into my flesh hard enough to leave dark bruises shaped like fingerprints. He shook me roughly while I struggled to maintain my balance, my ribs screaming with pain from the earlier impact. "Sign the papers or the next time will be worse." He threatened, his face inches from mine. "You don't have any power here anymore. You're just a confused old woman who can't take care of herself." I stopped struggling and looked directly into his eyes, seeing a stranger wearing my son's face. This person who'd grown up in this house, who I'd raised and loved and supported through every difficulty, was now threatening me with physical violence to steal everything Frank and I had worked decades to build. "I need to lie down," I whispered, my hand touching my burning cheek. "I think I need to rest and think about all this." Jessica gathered up the unsigned papers with obvious frustration. "Fine, but we're not waiting much longer. These arrangements have to be finalized by the end of the week." I nodded submissively and walked carefully toward my bedroom, my ribs aching with each step. Behind me, I heard them resume their planning in voices they assumed I couldn't hear clearly. "She'll sign tomorrow," Brad said with confidence. "I made my point. She knows I'm not playing games anymore." "I hope you're right," Jessica replied. "Hayes says the court date is Thursday morning. If she doesn't cooperate voluntarily, We'll have to proceed with the emergency competency hearing without her consent. I closed my bedroom door and locked it quietly, then moved to my window to assess my escape route. My car keys were hidden in my coat pocket, and my emergency bag was packed and concealed in the closet. Most importantly, Detective Hernandez was expecting my call within the next 2 hours to initiate the final phase of our plan. But first, I needed to document the physical assault with photographs that would serve as evidence. The bruises on my wrist were already darkening my ribs, showed the beginning of discoloration, and my cheek bore a clear handprint. These injuries would prove that their manipulation had escalated to physical violence, adding assault charges to the fraud, and elder abuse counts already being prepared. I waited until I heard them leave for what Jessica announced as a meeting with their lawyer, then quietly gathered my belongings and slipped out the back door. My car started immediately, and I drove to the police station where Detective Hernandez was waiting with arrest warrants, medical personnel to document my injuries, and Adult Protective Services to begin immediate intervention. The assault had been the final mistake they needed to make. What they'd intended as intimidation to force my compliance had actually provided the evidence necessary to destroy them completely. Frank always said that bullies eventually overplay their hand, and Brad had just proven that wisdom in the most decisive way possible. By the time they returned home expecting to find a frightened, beaten woman ready to surrender her independence, they would instead find an empty house and a future that no longer existed. The confused, helpless victim they'd been abusing was about to become the architect of their complete destruction. The police station buzzed with controlled activity as Detective Hernandez coordinated the final elements of our operation. Medical photographer Lisa Zhang documented my injuries with clinical precision. The darkening bruises around my wrist shaped like fingerprints, the discoloration across my ribs from being shoved into the counter, and the clear outline of a handprint on my cheek. Each photograph would serve as evidence in the criminal proceedings that would follow. These assault charges elevate everything, Detective Hernandez explained while reviewing the arrest warrants. Combined with the financial fraud, elder abuse, and conspiracy charges, we're looking at significant prison time for both defendants. Adult Protective Services investigator Janet Morrison had been building her case file for weeks based on evidence I'd provided. Her report documented systematic financial exploitation, medical abuse through drugging, and psychological manipulation designed to convince me and others of my incompetence. The scope of this abuse is remarkable, Janet told me as we reviewed her findings. They created an entire fictional narrative about your mental decline, while actively causing the symptoms they claim to observe. Attorney Sarah Mitchell had prepared comprehensive legal documents that would invalidate every fraudulent authorization Brad and Jessica had obtained. More importantly, she'd filed emergency motions to freeze all accounts they'd accessed and protect my home from their planned refinancing scheme. By tomorrow morning, they'll discover that every financial avenue they were counting on has been blocked, Sarah explained with satisfaction. The mortgage pre-approval will be revoked, the credit cards will be canceled, and their access to your accounts will be terminated. Meanwhile, private investigator David Torres positioned himself across the street from my house to document everything that happened during my absence. His surveillance equipment would capture their celebration and provide additional evidence of their criminal intentions. I spent that afternoon in a hotel room watching from the window as storm clouds gathered over the mountains west of Denver. The metaphor felt appropriate. I was the approaching storm that Brad and Jessica couldn't see coming, and their destruction would be as sudden and overwhelming as a Colorado thunderstorm. David called me at 6:30 that evening with his initial report. They returned home about an hour ago and seemed surprised to find you gone. I watched them search the house thoroughly, checking closets and the basement. Now they're making phone calls. His surveillance revealed that their initial concern had quickly transformed into relief when they convinced themselves I'd simply gone to stay with friends or family temporarily. Rather than worry about my welfare or the violence that had driven me away, they interpreted my absence as an opportunity to finalize their plans without interference. By 8 o'clock, David reported they'd begun making celebratory phone calls to friends and accomplices. Jessica just invited several people over for what she's calling a freedom party. She specifically mentioned that you're finally out of the picture. The guest list revealed the full scope of their conspiracy. Jessica's sister Amanda arrived first, bringing her husband Rick, who owned a printing business that had apparently produced the forged documents. Several of Jessica's co-workers from the boutique came with champagne and party supplies. Even attorney Ronald Hayes made an appearance, though he left quickly when the party atmosphere became too reckless for professional comfort. David's recordings captured conversations that went far beyond anything I'd imagined. These weren't desperate people who'd gradually succumb to temptation. They were calculating criminals who'd planned my destruction with enthusiasm and precision. She actually believed we were trying to help her? Jessica laughed while wearing my grandmother's pearl necklace. The old fool never suspected a thing even when we were drugging her tea right in front of her face. Amanda's response chilled me. I told you this would work. I researched elder abuse cases for months before we started. The key is making everyone believe the victim is losing their mind naturally. Rick bragged about his role in producing forged signatures and falsified documents. I've gotten so good at copying her handwriting, I could probably forge her will if you need me to. Brad's contribution to the conversation revealed depths of cruelty I hadn't suspected. The best part is making her think she's going crazy. You should have seen her face when she'd find her stuff moved around. She actually started questioning her own sanity. They discussed their plans for my house with the casual entitlement of people who'd already forgotten I was a human being, rather than an obstacle to their financial goals. Jessica had researched renovation costs and decorating ideas. Brad talked about converting my sewing room into a home office. They'd even selected which of my belongings to sell versus donate, calculating potential profits from my lifetime of accumulated possessions. The nursing home placement wasn't intended as genuine care. It was simply the most cost-effective way to warehouse me while they liquidated my assets. Sunset Manor is perfect because they accept Medicaid patients, Jessica explained to the group. Once we spend down her savings on the admission fees, the state will cover the ongoing costs, and we keep everything else. Their celebration intensified as the evening progressed. Someone brought a sound system that filled my house with music loud enough to disturb neighbors 3 blocks away. They danced in my living room, drank expensive wine purchased with my stolen money, and toasted their successful theft with champagne flutes that had been wedding gifts to Frank and me 40 years earlier. David's surveillance captured Jessica giving a mock toast around 10 o'clock. To Myrtle, who was stupid enough to believe family actually cared about her. Thanks for making us rich, you pathetic old bat. The crowd's laughter at this cruel joke was recorded clearly enough to use as evidence in court. These weren't people who'd made desperate choices during difficult circumstances. They were predators who enjoyed causing pain and viewed my suffering as entertainment. Brad's speech was even worse. I should have done this years ago instead of waiting for the old man to die first. She never deserved this house or that money anyway. She just got lucky marrying someone with a good job. Their discussion revealed they'd been planning this scheme since before Frank's death. Jessica had researched his pension benefits and life insurance policies, calculating my exact financial worth while he was still alive. They'd simply waited for him to die naturally rather than risk the complications that would arise from a more aggressive timeline. Around midnight, their party began winding down, but not before they'd thoroughly trashed my home. Furniture was moved or damaged, personal photographs were scattered or broken, and my kitchen showed evidence of food fights and spilled alcohol. They'd treated my home like a cheap hotel room they'd never have to see again. David's final report of the evening detailed their cleanup attempts and departure plans. Most of the guests left by 1 in the morning, but Jessica and Brad remained apparently planning to sleep in my house, despite having assaulted me hours earlier. "They seem confident you won't return tonight," David informed me during our final call. "Jessica mentioned that you're probably sleeping in your car somewhere too embarrassed to ask friends for help." Their assumption about my helplessness and isolation would prove to be their final miscalculation. While they slept in the house they'd stolen through fraud and violence, Detective Hernandez was finalizing arrest warrants and coordinating with patrol units for early morning arrests. I spent that night in a comfortable hotel room, warm and safe, reviewing evidence and preparing for the confrontation that would begin at sunrise. Frank had always told me that justice delayed wasn't necessarily justice denied, as long as the delay was used productively to ensure the guilty couldn't escape consequences. Tomorrow would bring an accounting for every lie they'd told, every dollar they'd stolen, and every moment of suffering they'd caused. The party was ending, but the reckoning was just beginning. Dawn broke gray and cold over Denver as Detective Hernandez and I sat in an unmarked police car watching my house from across the street. The party debris scattered across my front lawn told the story of their premature celebration. Empty champagne bottles, plastic cups trampled into the frost-covered grass, and what appeared to be remnants of my photo albums torn and discarded like confetti. "Are you ready for this?" Carlos asked, checking his radio one final time. I nodded, my heart steady despite the magnitude of what was about to unfold. After months of careful planning and patient evidence gathering, the moment of truth had arrived. "I've been ready since the day I found those crushed pills in Jessica's jewelry box." At exactly 7:30 in the morning, Detective Hernandez approached my front door while uniformed officers positioned themselves around the house. Adult Protective Services investigator Janet Morrison walked beside me as we returned to the home I'd fled in fear less than 24 hours earlier. Attorney Sarah Mitchell followed with a briefcase full of legal documents that would restore my rights and protect my assets. The doorbell chimed with the same cheerful melody that had welcomed legitimate visitors for decades. Through the frosted glass, I could see movement and hear urgent whispered conversations as Brad and Jessica realized their party had attracted unwanted attention. Brad opened the door wearing my deceased husband's favorite robe, his hair disheveled and his breath reeking of alcohol. His expression shifted from annoyance to confusion to dawning horror as he recognized me standing behind Detective Hernandez. "Mrs. Patterson, we need to speak with you and your family about some serious allegations," Detective Hernandez announced formally. "May we come in?" "I don't understand," Brad stammered, stepping back as we entered my own living room. "Mom, what's going on? Where have you been? We were worried sick." The irony of his concern was breathtaking, considering the bruises he'd left on my body were still darkening under my sleeves. Jessica appeared from the kitchen wearing my best jewelry and a silk blouse I recognized as one of my Christmas gifts from Frank. "Myrtle." She rushed toward me with arms outstretched, but Detective Hernandez stepped between us. "Ma'am, please remain where you are. We're conducting a criminal investigation, and I need everyone to stay calm and cooperative." The living room that had hosted their celebration looked like a war zone. My furniture was overturned or damaged, family photographs lay scattered across the floor, with some showing deliberate damage, and my grandmother's china cabinet stood empty with precious pieces broken and abandoned. "Jessica Patterson and Bradley Patterson, you're both under arrest," Detective Hernandez announced, producing handcuffs as backup officers moved into position. Jessica's face went white as comprehension dawned. Arrested for what? We haven't done anything wrong. We've been taking care of her because she's losing her mind. The charges include elder abuse, financial fraud, identity theft, conspiracy, and assault. Detective Hernandez continued methodically. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Brad lunged toward me with such fury that 2 officers had to restrain him. You crazy old witch! What lies have you been telling them? Nobody will believe you over us. Actually, we have extensive evidence, Janet Morrison interjected, opening her case file. Including audio recordings of your planning sessions, photographic evidence of forged documents, medical documentation of systematic drugging, and witness testimony from multiple sources. The handcuffs clicked around Brad's wrists as he continued ranting about my supposed mental incompetence. Jessica tried a different approach, collapsing into theatrical tears and claiming everything had been a misunderstanding, motivated by genuine concern for my welfare. We only wanted to help her, she sobbed convincingly. She's been so confused lately, forgetting things, acting strangely. We were trying to arrange proper care before she hurt herself. Attorney Sarah Mitchell stepped forward with her briefcase. The medical evidence says otherwise. Dr. Helen Sanders has confirmed that Mrs. Patterson shows no signs of cognitive decline or mental incompetence. However, blood tests revealed significant levels of sedatives that match medications found hidden in your personal belongings. As they were led away in handcuffs, Brad made one final attempt at intimidation. You'll never prove anything. It's your word against ours, and everyone knows you're losing your mind. Detective Hernandez smiled grimly. Actually, we have recordings of you and your wife celebrating Mrs. Patterson's departure and discussing your plans to steal her assets. Your own words will be the strongest evidence against you. The house fell silent except for the sound of police radios and the careful documentation being conducted by crime scene technicians. Janet Morrison began photographing the damage to my home and belongings, while Sarah Mitchell explained the legal protections now in place to prevent any further attempts at financial exploitation. Over the following hours, the true scope of their criminal enterprise became clear. Dr. Patricia Novak was arrested for medical fraud and conspiracy after evidence revealed she'd been providing false diagnoses in exchange for payments from Jessica. Attorney Ronald Hayes faced disbarment and criminal charges for his role in preparing fraudulent legal documents. Amanda and Rick were arrested at their home later that morning, charged as accessories for their roles in forging documents and researching elder abuse tactics. The printing equipment in Rick's basement contained evidence of dozens of fraudulent signatures and falsified financial documents. The financial investigation revealed they'd stolen over $75,000 from my accounts through various schemes. Credit cards opened in my name carried balances exceeding $30,000. They'd even taken out a small business loan using my home as collateral, planning to default once they'd gained control of the property through conservatorship. But the most satisfying discovery was their own financial destruction. The luxury townhouse they'd planned to buy was purchased using fraudulent loan applications that became void once their scheme was exposed. They'd already spent money they didn't legally possess on expensive purchases that were now being seized as evidence. Bank fraud investigator Lisa Chen worked with me to reverse every unauthorized transaction and close every fraudulent account. The complex web of financial crimes they'd created unraveled completely within 72 hours of their arrests. Dr. Sanders conducted comprehensive medical and psychological evaluations that conclusively proved my complete mental competence. Her report detailed how the systematic drugging had been designed to create symptoms that supported claims of cognitive decline, but caused no permanent damage to my health or cognitive abilities. Margaret, my observant neighbor, provided crucial testimony about the suspicious activities she'd witnessed over months of careful documentation. Pastor William confirmed that Jessica and Brad had been systematically building a false narrative about my mental condition throughout our church community. The legal proceedings moved swiftly once the evidence was presented. Brad pleaded guilty to assault, elder abuse, and financial fraud charges in exchange for a 3-year prison sentence plus full restitution. Jessica initially maintained her innocence, but eventually accepted a plea agreement for 2 years imprisonment, plus community service requirements. Dr. Novak lost her medical license and received 18 months in federal prison for medical fraud. Attorney Hayes was disbarred and sentenced to 2 years for his role in the conspiracy. Amanda and Rick received probation and financial penalties for their participation. The house required extensive cleaning and some repairs, but I approached the restoration as an opportunity to create the home Frank and I had always envisioned. I used the recovered stolen funds plus penalties to renovate the kitchen, update the bathrooms, and create a beautiful garden in the backyard where they'd held their cruel celebration. Most importantly, I established the Frank Patterson Memorial Fund to support elder abuse prevention and victim assistance programs throughout Colorado. My experience had taught me that financial predators often target isolated seniors who have no family support system or advocates to protect them. I began volunteering with Adult Protective Services using my investigative skills and personal experience to help other seniors recognize and escape similar situations. Janet Morrison became a close friend and frequent collaborator as we worked together to educate communities about elder abuse prevention. Dr. Sanders and I developed educational presentations for senior centers and community groups, teaching older adults how to protect themselves from financial exploitation and recognize early warning signs of systematic abuse. Margaret and I strengthened our friendship through shared gardening projects and weekly coffee conversations. She'd been instrumental in my survival by maintaining careful observations and providing crucial testimony, proving that good neighbors can be lifelines during dangerous situations. The Methodist church where I'd volunteered for decades became a source of renewed purpose as Pastor William and I created support groups for seniors dealing with family conflicts and financial exploitation. My story encouraged others to speak up about their experiences and seek help before situations became dangerous. 1 year after the arrests, I received a letter from Jessica in the Colorado Women's Correctional Facility. She claimed to have found religion and begged for forgiveness, asking if I could provide character references for her parole hearing and perhaps help with her legal fees for an appeal. I read the first paragraph, recognized the same manipulative tone she'd used throughout her campaign to destroy my independence, and tore the letter into pieces without finishing it. Instead of dwelling on her continued attempts at manipulation, I spent that afternoon planting roses in my garden and planning a dinner party for the friends who'd supported me through the darkest period of my life. The house is peaceful now, filled with laughter from people who genuinely care about my well-being rather than my financial assets. My health is excellent, my mind is sharp, and my future is entirely under my own control. The legal protections Sarah Mitchell established ensure that no one can ever again use forged documents or false medical claims to steal my independence. Frank would be proud of how I fought back against people who underestimated my intelligence and determination. More than that, he'd approve of how I've used this experience to help other seniors avoid similar predators and protect themselves from exploitation. Sometimes at night, sitting in the chair by the window where Frank and I used to read together, I reflect on the lessons this ordeal taught me. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong. Document everything carefully. Build relationships with trustworthy people who will advocate for you. Never assume that family members have your best interests at heart simply because they're related to you. Most importantly, remember that age brings wisdom and experience that younger people often underestimate. The same life skills that help you raise children, manage households, and build careers can be powerful weapons against those who try to exploit your supposed vulnerability. Brad and Jessica thought they were stealing from a confused, helpless elderly woman. Instead, they targeted someone who'd learned patience planning and precision from a master investigator. Their own arrogance and greed became the tools of their destruction. 6 months ago, I began traveling to places Frank and I had always planned to visit. I've seen the Grand Canyon, toured historic New England, and spent weeks in national parks throughout the western states. These adventures represent the freedom they tried to steal and the independence I fought to preserve. The money they attempted to steal is being used exactly as Frank and I intended to support causes we believed in, to help people in genuine need, and to ensure I can live comfortably and independently for the rest of my life. Their greed cost them everything while gaining them nothing except criminal records and destroyed reputations. As I finish telling you this story, I want you to consider something important. Have you seen signs of elder abuse in your own community? Have you noticed isolated seniors who might be vulnerable to financial exploitation or family manipulation? Are there older adults in your life who could benefit from your support and advocacy? Elder abuse is far more common than most people realize, and it often goes undetected because victims are ashamed, confused, or too frightened to seek help. Your awareness and willingness to act could save someone from experiencing what I endured. Please take a moment to like this video if my story helped you understand the warning signs of elder abuse. Subscribe to this channel for more stories about overcoming adversity and fighting back against injustice. Share this video with friends and family members who might benefit from learning about these issues. And comment below to let me know if you've encountered similar situations or have questions about protecting yourself or others from financial predators. Thank you for listening to my story with such attention and care. I hope my experience helps you recognize that age should never be mistaken for weakness, and that sometimes the most dangerous opponents are the ones who underestimate the strength of people they consider powerless. May you always trust your instincts, protect your independence, and never hesitate to fight for what's rightfully yours. The truth has a way of emerging eventually, and justice, though sometimes delayed, can be more thorough and satisfying than immediate revenge. Take care of yourselves and the seniors in your communities. Together, we can ensure that no one else has to endure what my family tried to do to me.